The core of the work is awakening, the awakening to our, let's say, true nature. But then we are exploring what is our true nature, and I believe that our true nature is on one side timeless, eternal. It's just the deepest spaciousness that there is in everybody who is listening and everybody who is watching, or the one who is talking. And at the same time it's filled with an ever-evolving or moving content, which in the non-dual tradition, I believe timelessness and time are actually non-dual. So there is not either or, but they are both true to a certain extent, and both are necessary to create non-dual understanding. And so we are exploring on one hand how we identify ourselves with structures of consciousness that we call me, and that they are just movement, and therefore we freeze the movement of life to a certain kind of me. And by setting this free, we on one hand allow the evolution of human life to develop further on, and at the same time we are immersing ourselves more and more in the timelessness of our true nature. So we actually become empty and at the same time full. And I am very much interested in a spirituality that looks at both aspects of the non-dual teaching, not just on heading towards peace. Peace is just one realization, but peace in the movement is even a deeper realization. So this is what's the nature of the work. So because the human mind, it's the tendency of the human thinking in this evolutionary stage is to create a lot of either-ors. The mind always needs to discern. The mind always needs to find the safe path. So the evolutionary tendency of the mind is to keep you safe, and it will do the best thing in order to predict ways of how life can unfold. So therefore the mind will say, okay, if you tell me life is timeless, then it's this, and then my true nature might be timeless. So the mind identifies itself with the notion of timelessness, which is not timeless, it's a notion of timelessness. So most of the people, when they hear there's a timeless aspect to us, first of all we create an image of timelessness. So the real spiritual practice starts actually by realizing the image of timelessness, and by transcending the image of timelessness into true timelessness. And at the same time, the mind might say, okay, there's evolution, so life is developing. So how can it be that we are timeless and we are developing at the same time? So there's actually, again, an image of evolution that contradicts the image of timelessness. So as long as I live in these two images, they seem like opposed. In the moment I transcend these images, I learn to transcend the notion of and the feeling of my separate self. In the moment I transcend my subtle bodies of separate self, that give me the feeling and the notion and the experience to be separate, then suddenly timelessness and evolution merge into not two. Because originally they are not two. But in the bubble, in the separate bubble of my experience, they appear as two, because as a separate entity I need to create an inside and an outside. So in the moment I create these two, in order to be a functional human being, on one hand, in my development, I live in this kind of contradiction. in the moment my spiritual practice or an awakening experience or whatever shows me the illusion, not the illusion of life, the illusion of this sense of separate self. Because some traditions say life is an illusion. I don't think life is an illusion. The separate perception of life and the images that we create from life and we interpret them, they are illusionistic. And in the moment I learn to transcend them, I will see that evolution and timelessness, the eternal and the ever-moving, are not two. They are two just in my images of it, but not as a directness. The directness of evolution and timelessness are not two. Ultimately, there is no process of awakening because the awakened state is here. But at the same time, for most of the people, because the identification with the habits of this body-mind, the body-mind is the collection of all my body sensations, my emotions, my thoughts. So consciousness is identified with these structures. So the deconstruction or disidentification with these structures seems like a process, and it is a process on one level. In space and time it's a process, and at the same time the pointing out of this ever-present playground of everything is always here. So this means that the paper that we are written on is always here. If you read a book and you read the words, you create a meaning. So when you read a book, you create a story in your own mind of what you're reading. Life is quite similar. You're always reading a book, so you're always looking at nothing, but nothing is so simple that everything overshadows nothing. So all the activities within myself overshadow the pure isness that there is. So and therefore it seems like a way, but actually it's just looking at the paper. So there is no way because we are painted on the paper that we are researching. So the paper is our true nature, and the story that we are is written on the paper. And by the disidentification might seem as a process, but it's part of the story that is written on the paper. So we are never more far away of God or the transcendent nature, or however we call it, the essence. We are always in the same distance. It doesn't matter if you're a good human being or if you are not a good human being, if you're a moral human being or if you're not moral human being, if you are very awake or not so awake. You are never further away from God, from the true nature. But in my mind, it might seem as a far distance because the activity of my mind might overshadow it. So, and therefore the process of awakening is on one hand waking up to the everlasting peace that there is, to eternity, but I believe that as well it's waking up to the unconditional movement of the universe. And I think sometimes in non-dual teaching the second part is a bit left out, which means I have a higher love to peace and silence than I have to the movement and the noise of the world. So, but non-duality doesn't mean in just attaining peace. Non-duality means mastering peace and mastering the movement of life. So create peace within the movement of life. So if this is true, my spiritual practice will show me transcendence, but will also give me the mastery within the movement of life. And this means in the Tao Te Ching there is a sentence that says, put things in order before they exist. It doesn't say things don't exist. It says, put things in order before they exist. So you need to realize who you are before you exist. And at the same time, you need to master the whole movement, how things create themselves to be manifest. And if you master both, so you are somebody that is totally transcendent and at the same time knows how to be the full expression of moment to moment to moment living. This means also that non-duality is not opposed to therapy, to developmental work, to the evolution of culture. I simply very much believe that the evolution of the human complexity and of culture is part of the non-dual teaching. And therefore evolution is not opposed to non-duality, because then it would be a non-duality without evolution. So it would be non-dual, but it would create a subtle duality with evolution. So evolution is part of the non-dual teaching, not opposed to it. And I think if I look at life like this, so then I, as someone who is more awake, I will naturally be more peaceful inside, and at the same time I will naturally care for everything that there is in the expression of life. Because I'm equally in everything that there is as a structure, and I'm equally nothing. So I'm empty and full at the same time. Of course, the human mind will always think that the I needs to be more perfect. So the I needs to be more something. And so the reflection on this movement needs to be addressed and deconstructed, I believe. But that there is a creation force, an intelligence that is still developmental, is equally true. So, for example, if people are in certain situations and in their former stages of evolution and development they didn't fully integrate certain aspects of their intelligence. So I believe very much that when I care for culture, I need to care for the aspects of the intelligence that haven't been fully integrated, because life is like a piano player, and all of us in the subtle realm, in the realm of energy, not in the realm of unformed awareness, but in the realm of where everything gets born and manifests, there are certain rules to the manifestation. And if I'm also in the manifest world, then everything that I speak has an energy. And so the competence to the perception of this energy can deepen our awareness into the development of life. And I simply believe that people develop also, that you are not the same anymore today than you have been with 5 years. Something happened from when people are 5 years and then they are 30. So there is a process that's happening as well. And the process is not opposed to the unformed awareness. And this means, so the mind can create a notion that I need to be more perfect, which means that the ego structure takes ownership of the process. So this needs to be deconstructed. But at the same time, there's a driving force in the universe that is simply rising to higher complexities of life. So we cannot argue with the fact that in the Middle Age there was actually another level of life quality than we have now. So now much less people are suffering the same way that they were suffering before. So on a cultural level there is development. And if in my mind I don't create a separation that either it's timeless or it's a development, so if I can see them truly non-dual, then I can support the development. So there is also a process of easing the suffering by becoming aware how we create it. Suffering is the resistance to the pure movement of life, and is actually the holding back from life is creating suffering. So if we become aware of the process of restricting the intelligence, so the intelligence can flow. So if you have a culture that is immersed in eternity and equally supporting the potential, I believe we create a very healthy culture where we don't see those as opposed. Again, we could create a separation between allowing and fully participating. So I believe in a mature society that people in a mature society, as we see it more and more, let's say in the modern world, that people are very crystallized into their egos. So on one hand it needs a strong participation in the process that's happening in order to transcend the notion of the ego that says this is my process, this is a separate process from your process. So in the moment I open this, the intelligence in you and the intelligence in me are equally flowing in a river anyway. So there is a river that we are swimming in. And I can resist the movement, which will cause a lot of effort within me, or I can simply allow this movement. But if I allow the movement, I also participate in the movement. Which means that some people could say, okay, there is anyway nothing to be done. And if you look again, because there are some pearls in the Tao Te Ching, for example, if you look in the Tao Te Ching, it says, Wu Wei Wu is non-action. But non-action doesn't mean that there is nothing that I need to do. If there is time to do something, I need to do it. Otherwise I'm resisting it and I'm creating an action by resisting life. So when life also develops through me, when the universe develops through me, there is a certain movement, and if I just allow and participate in this movement, it can happen without friction. If I don't participate, so to speak, if there is an impulse from deep within to act in the world, in a certain area of my life, and I don't do it, so I stop it. And stopping means I create an action. So non-action means actually to move in the river as fast as the water is moving. So it doesn't create a push and it doesn't create a stop. And if there is no push and no stop, we actually don't exist as separate entities. If I'm fully immersed in the flow of life, there is no me and life. There's just life that is living. So it's not two. But if I'm creating, my sense of self is actually the resistance to life. All the sum of my resistances create a sense of self, a small self, that feels a bit separate to the outside world. If I'm fully immersed in the stream of life, that everything around us is also this stream of life, then there is no me here and the world there. There is just life. And life is fully living. And I believe that both is equally necessary. Otherwise we create a bit spiritual practitioners. They're constantly deconstructing their reality. And I guess not really fully understanding the deep non-duality of the eternal and the evolution. The psychological suffering of emotions is already the resistance to the emotions. If our emotional intelligence is free, it will appear and it will be a wave and it will disappear. It's simple. It comes, it goes. It comes, it goes. If there is someone that jumps on it and says, you need to stay in the room, it's like a guest. They come in like thoughts. They come in one door, they cross your living room, and they leave in the other door. So if you allow them to do this movement, and you don't take ownership and say, you are me, then there is actually just free flow of life. So in the emotions, and emotional health and emotional development and maturity is simply a big part of life. And we see it, many spiritual communities that are practicing, when they don't integrate their emotional shadows, their shadows take over at a certain time and create the disintegration often of the communities or serious problems or interpersonal problems. Our whole culture actually is very fragile often because of the unintegrated parts of our emotional and mental structures. So if we induce a very high level of competence in this interpersonal field, we will also support the health in the mental and in the emotional field of experience. And I believe that this should be an inherent part of our spiritual practice. Because if I'm not just deconstructing, but actually deconstructing and reconstructing as the creativity flows, so deconstructing structures is very lovely, but life always creates new evolutionary structures according to what life needs. So people that are immersed in the stream of life, so they create structures when they need them, and they can let go of them when they don't need them. Mastery means that you can walk, and whenever you make your step, the floor appears. You don't walk just where it's safe, where you know where the floor is. So you walk, and you make a step into the unknown, and when you make the step, the floor appears. So masters, I believe, move like this through life. They are totally empty, but also totally full. And if my emotional field actually is stuck, then I might transcend into more and more awareness, but it might still lead to the fact that my body and my actions in life might not be healthy. Even if I'm very aware, I'm more and more immersed in the space, but I'm not fully connected to the web of life through my emotional grid because it's blocked. And if it's blocked, I cannot see reality clearly. So if there is a block in my energy, the block in my energy will be a filter on my screen. So if one part of my life is blocked, I can transcend more, but if I transcend, I cannot integrate anymore. Through transcendence, I often cannot integrate that which I split off, because splitting off some emotions is an action that I do without me knowing I'm doing this. So then I can transcend more, but this doesn't mean that this movement necessarily will stop. So we see often spiritual teachers that are simply very developed in their transcendence, but still very undeveloped in certain parts of their lives. So they might live in very neurotic relationships, and at the same time they are teaching non-dual teachings. So how can this be? How can it be that so often in history they were very developed beings, but either socially or intellectually or emotionally or even intuitively they were not so developed according to their stage? So this means that the transcendence not necessarily will make us an integrated, holistic participation in the universe. For sure, I see this, and I see it's not necessarily needs to be an either or. Our mind has a tendency to create an either or, and it's both. I think the developments of the Western tradition and the achievements of the Eastern contemplative traditions are equally important, and life contains and consists of both. So if I'm able to not think in either or, but you can deal with emotions and stay attached and addicted to them, so this would actually be in the way of the contemplative awakening. But if you become just fully intelligent in your emotional experience, so according to everyone's emotional intelligence, not everybody comes with the same potential. There are some people, for them the emotional experience is there, but it's not so important. There are some other people, for them it's very important. These are very highly evolved, emotional, intelligent beings. So the work that they will do in the world and the participation in society and in the world will run a lot on this track. So if these people don't work with this, they will actually feel more and more unhappy, because this is their main driving mission, their main motivation in life. So, and I believe that an integral or a holistic spiritual development includes definitely the work with our emotions, but just in order to mature them. Because what we're saying is, often the emotional experience of people is sometimes not as old as they appear in their bodies, which means that their emotional experience is not synchronized with who they are, which means that the emotional life will be felt as a block. And if it's felt as a block, we try to get rid of them. So we try to meditate more in order that we don't have to deal with this. But I believe if we equally care about transcendence and the movement, we need to deal with this, because this is part of the foundation of our co-creation here. And if this matters to me, if I care for the world equally as if I care for the transcendent or for the timeless, then if my caring is really non-dual, then there is nothing in the whole existence that would not matter to me. Everything is part of life, and also the stuck emotions. And so they need to be brought in. They need to be fully in our awareness, to say we don't have just a realization, but we also have a manifestation of this realization. So it's not just the realization goes, let's say, to the unformed, to the nirvana, so to speak, and the manifestation goes fully into life as an expression, which is the expression of an enlightened life. So, and for me a master is not just only someone that is immersed in nothing, but also because they are more and more empty, they allow more and more light to flow through them. So they actually enlighten also the creation. And this is the difference also between the more retreat-based spiritual traditions and the more tantric-based spiritual traditions. You could say you go to the monastery or to the cave to just practice and you retreat from life, and there are other people that would say, okay, but I want to retreat and be fully in life at the same time. So I want to participate in life and I want to be transcendent at the same time, which the second one simply appeals at the moment more to me, because we are most of the time in the world meeting people that are in the world. So I don't see my role at all as something, but often people ask me to, what does it mean, or how is it called? So of course teaching is happening, I would say. And I simply believe that for most of the people it's very beneficial if they have a clear reflection to their experience in their lives, which we would call a teacher. So I believe that in most of the communities it's very helpful that we have the community as a container of practice and as people who are on the path of awakening, and that they practice together in order to remind each other, and also in order to surround each other with people that are actually in a similar direction. Because I believe for many people we need a container of intensity in order to wake up. And at the same time, equally important is to have some people, one or more so-called teachers in our lives, that will give us a clear reflection to where we create separations. So that gives a clear reflection to cut through the separation in order to be more awake. And I think that it's very necessary, and I think for many people they would get stuck if you would not more and more often have this reflection with certain clear people. And this might be one teacher for your life, this might be one teacher for some time, and then you move on to another teacher. But in the postmodern spiritual scene, it's anyway very capitalistic and consumption oriented, which means that many people jump from one thing to another, consume here a bit and here a bit, but when it gets confrontational with their own process, so then they back off and say, oh, it's not my path. Because in the spiritual field, I see many people that are more interested in their wellness and in solving some problems than in the actuality and the radicality of awakening. And the radicality of awakening might sometimes be comfortable, but might sometimes be very uncomfortable. Because if you get a clear reflection on your identifications, which are addictions, then you might not want to let them go. So it's like when somebody takes the heroin from someone. So can be a very uncomfortable process. And I think we need to know that radical awakening means that we commit to that which is bigger than comfort and discomfort. So we commit to something that actually transcends both. And so I think that for many people, teachers are very important, and also to go deep at a certain point in their development is very important. And for some people there is kind of let's say another cosmic setup that they will wake up by themselves, and this also has a reason why sometimes it happens like this. When we look in society, as we look in every individual, because of the fact that there is an evolutionary drive. So when you are in a river and you're swimming, so you don't feel the water so much because you're in it. You're swimming with the speed of the water. You just feel it as wet, but it doesn't create a lot of pressure on you. But if you would swim to the shore of the river and you would grab a lot of branches and you would not like to move with the river, so the water will create a stronger and stronger pressure on you because you are stopping the movement, so it creates a pressure. Many people wake up to a certain extent because of crisis in their life. A crisis means that I don't develop voluntarily, I don't continue the movement of life voluntarily. So, for example, if someone has a job, and one day you wake up and you feel it's done, this job is not anymore for me, I need to quit. But then the mind kicks in and says, oh, it's safe and I need to have the money and will I find another job and that. So the mind might jump on you, on your authentic impulse to quit your job. Every day from this day on, you will feel a stronger pressure. It's a pressure in my body, in my emotions, in my thoughts. People can get very frustrated when their evolution moves on, but they don't move on. So it creates a pressure, an evolutionary pressure. And what we see in society today is that many people hold on to the habits of what they know, and then it creates also society structures that are holding on to what we know, for example, an economical system that is not anymore fitting to the needs that we have as a global community. So when this global community needs to evolve, but many people try to keep safe, then it creates more pressure, until we actually have a crisis that can have two outcomes. One is that enough people see the cracks in society as creative openings where the light comes in and become creative in creating new structures that are much more functional. And then you channel the evolutionary pressure into creativity. So you participate and create something new, because the universe creates through you something new. Or you stay in this kind of more contracted level, and you actually will perceive much more suffering because of staying attached to this. And most probably, if too many people will not become more creative and more awake, then it will end in a disaster. So in a society, if enough people become creative, they move society forward into next levels of development, which are much more functional. If not enough people become creative, at a certain stage it will go into a regression in consciousness. We go down the ladder, and when we go down the ladder, it will become violent. And so it has been in all the history, you see the same thing. So either people wake up to more consciousness and more evolutionary movement, or they become destructive and it ends in wars or riots or poverty or things like this. But the initial inherent movement for people who become creative, it's the best time. Because actually the things that need to break open by force, and this is the best time for people who are anyway developing to develop, because they just have an open space suddenly for their creativity to unfold. So for creative people, the crisis is a chance, because it's a chance to move society forward. And from, for example, national identities, we need to inhabit a much more global consciousness that will solve questions like climate crisis, resource crisis, overpopulation, if there is one. So there are many global questions that can be solved only from the next level of development, because in the next level of development we are much more intelligent than when we are too separate and too asleep. Separateness causes intelligence to go down. More transcendence and collective awareness will cause us to be more intelligent and answer the questions that we need to answer. I don't have much more to say than this. I don't have much more to say than this.